Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We so greatly appreciate your spending time and listening to our amazing guests that we find all over the place. And we want you to know that we appreciate it and we value your opinions. So if you go and listen to our YouTube channel and want to leave a comment here or there, we greatly appreciate that as well. Want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. If you would like to learn more about him, you can check out www.nativestorytellers.com. He and his wife are amazing storytellers, and if you've never listened to any of their the Native American stories, you'll be amazed at the fact that they are preserving their history, their cosmology, and their philosophies in a story form that stays in the memory a lot longer than a textbook would. So check it out. It's a very exciting way of preserving that our textbooks don't do at all. Mark has an amazing show for you tonight. He's got a very unique guest, and as always, it's a topic almost that I've never heard about, so I am going to be fascinated as well as the rest of you. So, Mark, glad to have you here tonight with your guest.
Hey, how's your week going?
So far, so good.
Good. Okay. And you can get started with something else before we get into the show. I just wanted to read a quick sentence. Pure, unspoiled religion in the eyes of God our Father is this: coming to the help of orphans and widows when they need it, and keeping oneself uncontaminated by the world. That's from James 1:19. And just want to say thank you, Randall, for your friendship, and see you tomorrow. We don't do a lot of UFO shows, but this week we're doing two. You had a great discussion last night about the Rendlesham Forest case, and tonight we're covering a lesser-known but nonetheless compelling UFO case study. Andrew Smith is our guest, and Andrew is the Executive Director of the Braxton County Convention and Visitors Bureau located in Sutton, West Virginia, and he's the curator of the Flatwoods Monster Museum. He has assisted in TV productions of this fascinating Flatwoods monster case. His work was featured on the History and Travel channels and the Small Town Monster Show. And Andrew was also a presenter at this year's Mothman Festival. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mark. How are you all doing tonight?
Oh, everything's fine here. And because last night's show featured the Rendlesham Forest case in England from and that happened in 1980. You got the most famous one is the Roswell incident in 1947. We get into some like the Kecksburg and what was it, like 1965. This Flatwoods Monster case happened in 1952.
Right.
Okay, we can get into the patterns a little bit, or if there are any patterns, a little bit later in the show. But let's recreate what was going on in Flatwoods, West Virginia, on this September 1952 evening. Give us the setup for the story.
Okay, I'd be happy to. It was in the little town of Flatwoods, which is in Braxton County, West Virginia, which is central West Virginia, on September 12th, 1952. This was around 7 o'clock in the evening, and the brothers, Eddy and Freddie May, as well as their friends Neil Nunley, Tommy Heyer, and Ronnie Shaver, were playing on the lawn of the Flatwoods Elementary School. While they were playing, they saw what they described as a fireball fly quickly overhead and appear to land on a nearby hilltop just past the Bailey Fisher farm, which was located about a half mile away. The group, being a pack of young, wily kids between the ages of 10 and 15, decided they better go investigate. So they started heading that way, and the road on the way to the Bailey Fisher farm actually went right by the May boys' home, where their mother Kathleen was. So they stopped and let her know what they were doing, and told them they were going to, go up to the Bailey Fisher farm and check out this fireball that landed on the hilltop. And so she decided she better go with them, and she also thought it would be a good idea to grab a family friend named Gene Lemon, who was nearby, who was visiting relatives in the area, who was actually a National Guardsman, who I believe was 18 or 19 at the time. So they trekked up on the hill, and as they crossed into the farm and walked across this small pasture field, they go through a gate into the woods where there's a footpath that's maybe about as wide as a car, or maybe a car or a truck rather might be able to drive up it, and otherwise they were underneath the forest canopy. So at this point it's very dark. Mm-hmm. So they're walking slowly toward the top of the hill, and they notice a pulsating red light at the top of the hill that shouldn't be there. At this point in time in Flatwoods, it was a lot less developed than it is now, a lot less lights, so it should have been pitch black. So as they're concentrating on this light and slowly making way toward it, a smell fills the air around the group that some of the witnesses at the time described as sulfuric in nature. Some of them talked about it almost having like the best way I can describe it would be like that ozone kind of smell that happens with electrical arcs, and things like that, like maybe with welding, that kind of a smell, which sort of put them at pause. And as they're investigating there, for not long, at some point they hear something to their left coming from the woods. They shine a flashlight over there, and what had to be at least 10 feet tall was a creature coming toward them in the woods fairly quietly while appearing to float and glide above the ground, while also emitting like a screeching or hissing sound. And so they, like I said, it had to be at least 10 foot tall, because they judged that by, there was a tree nearby that had their lowest branch was about that height, and it seemed to be about as tall as that branch. So they see this thing coming toward them, so they immediately turn tail and run away from the Bailey Fisher farm as quick as they can, run back down to the Mays house, and frantically place a call to the local dispatch to let them know what had happened and to have authorities come and immediately investigate.
Okay. So there are multiple eyewitnesses, and there's actually two adults, a mom and a enlisted man.
Yes, yeah, Gene Lemon.
Okay, so this isn't just a few, 3 or 4 kids, making up a story. This is being witnessed by credible adults.
Yeah, and something that I also think has made this case particularly unique and noteworthy, even going back then, which even though, in that early in the 1950s, as you mentioned, Roswell's the only other notable, really early sighting occurrence that sort of predates the Flatwoods Monster that I know of. I could be wrong about that. And then, of course, after that, and getting into the mid-50s or so, then it just becomes a rash of sightings. So I think one of the things that propelled the Flatwoods Monster into to a lot of its media exposure that it got at the time was because it was a rare occurrence, and because of the mix of the group seeing it. It's a lot of different people coming from kind of a lot of different backgrounds that would seem to indicate that the possibility of them all being in cahoots would be very low. And at the same time, having a lone witness that, could possibly be making up a story for their own notoriety also seems low. So I think that's one of the things that initially gave it so much credibility, because it did make national news at the time. But you're right, though, as time went on, going into the 50s, and that there was a rash of other sightings, and that, sci-fi movies at that point started becoming really big. Flatwoods Monster did get kind of lost in the wash a little bit, and lost some of its spotlight. But yeah, at the time, I do think that's what created that interest.
Okay. Well, there was the Phoenix Lights case in 1997. Somewhere about there. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
There were multiple eyewitnesses.
Oh yeah.
To that, so the backgrounds that you're talking about, make it a believable case, and there were also a number of drawings that the eyewitnesses did that are all very similar.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure. I know that I have seen 3 different eyewitness drawings taken at the time, although I do believe all of them to have been done by the children, although I'm not 100% sure. And I only know that one, at least, was recorded to a specific individual, and that was Freddie Mays. I've seen his because in his drawing, he actually signed his name under it. So that's how I know that he's the one that did it. And also I know Freddie, so I've been able to ask him about that. And so I have confirmed that he did that one. But yeah, if you look at all, there's, like I said, there's 3 that I know of. Now keep in mind, they're all children, and none of them are artists by any stretch. But if you line up all of their drawings, they're strikingly similar. Really, the only thing that changes is slight changes in proportion, and then maybe what you could call texture, because it was described as being this, having this large, round, red-colored head with a shape that either surrounded it or was behind it. It's not real clear. That was almost like a spade shape, and then a dark body that extended down. Like all 3 have, show that all those same shapes. There's only one that I can think of that really has a notable difference, and that's one where the head almost looks like it has, like, instead of being perfectly round and smooth, it almost appears to have like a wiggly outside line. But otherwise, the overall shape is still circular.
Okay, and you met Freddie, approaching 60-some years later.
Yeah. Whenever I first met him, it was probably 63 at least years later.
Okay. What it was the impact on him throughout his life?
Well, I honestly think that he went on to have a normal life, for the most part, as well as his brother Ed, who I've not gotten to talk to, but Fred and I have talked about Eddy, but he went on to have relatively normal life. However, I do think the experience that he had did, in a lot of ways, shape the whole entirety of the rest of his life, and probably shaped how he looks at the world. But like I said, he's a very reserved man. So I feel like he keeps a lot, sort of close to the chest. But otherwise ended up leading a fairly normal life. He was married, still is married. He ended up having one son, and had a pretty fruitful career his whole life, and retired. So otherwise, he's managed to have just a perfectly fine life. But like I said, those experiences that he had on that hilltop that night, I really do think, in one way or another, did affect the rest of his life and everybody that was involved.
Okay, and during Barbara's show last night, Jim, the guest, was talking about some of the physical effects that the eyewitnesses had being so close to the the phenomenon that was going on, and they experienced this like static electricity feeling, and they had nightmares later on. Was that a little bit of a pattern that got started in 1952, or did they not have any kind of physical effects?
Yeah, they did. They did. To the extent to which they were, actually affected by them, I'm not 100% sure. When you look back and read reportings from the time, they seem rather severe. But when I spoke to Freddie, in more recent years, when he talks about them, he seems to act and talk as if that they may have been exaggerated. somewhat, but I also think a part of that could be, like I said, he's a rather humble man. He doesn't really think of himself as anything special, so I think he might also have the inclination to downplay something as well. I mean, I'm not saying that he did, but I think that could be a possibility. But I know in early reportings of the experience, witnesses talked about that smell lingering in the air, causing nausea and headaches that were reported to last for days. I don't know of any sort of really severe or any sort of life-threatening side effects from it or anything like that, but that the physical effect seemed to be very real, and mostly consisted of, like I said, problems with nausea, problems that affected their stomach and their respiratory system, and things of that nature, and headaches.
Okay. When the boys, Mrs. May, and the Army guy, were at the Bailey Fisher farm. Did they see an actual craft? Is there any kind of markings on it? We heard a little bit about there were some markings on the Rendlesham Forest phenomenon that that was happening. Was there some kind of distinctive markings from the Flatwoods case?
Well, I'll tell you, when it comes to a craft, that actually is where it kind of gets into a little bit of disparity, depending on what reports you read and when they're given. If now, and again, Freddie wasn't all the way at the front of the pack. Keep him in mind. I'm pretty sure that Gene Lemon headed the pack, and it would make the most sense because he would have been, the most physically fit and that sort of thing. Where Freddie would have been, 11 at the time. But he said that he never saw a craft other than the pulsing red light, which made him presume that there was something up there, maybe something, craft light or whatever it was he saw in the sky. But then there were some reports from the time, like I said, from 52, that does mention a craft that I think they describe as almost like, for lack of a better word, egg-shaped, like being smooth, but definitely not being like a sphere, not being a perfect sphere, but maybe being oblong in nature. But that the only thing I've ever heard associated with those reports is that whatever it was smooth and glowing red.
Okay. So, that is, kind of segueing into my next question was, since Braxton County is in a really remote region, sparsely populated, it's an hour and a half south of Clarksburg. That's we're the biggest city to the north, and an hour, 45 minutes from Charleston. Yeah. There's really not too many people in the area. Is there a reason why, if this happened to be a spacecraft, is it crash? Did it crash land in this area, or was it going? Can we chart a course that it was following to another destination?
Well, I know in Frank Ficino's book, he tracked or was able to track in his research. Again, I don't know if it's bulletproof or not, but it's I've never verified it myself. But he tracks sightings of these crafts from Washington D.C. And then more, I guess it would be a westerly direction. And I know that his hypothesis is that there was actually a whole fleet of these vessels and that some were shot down. I don't know if that's accurate or not. The majority of what I've done is just looking at old reports from the time that specifically talk about the Flatwoods incident, and then the little bit of talking I've done with Freddie May. So I'm not super familiar with that, but it would kind of stand to reason. So that's one hypothesis. Could be another hypothesis that they're looking for a place to set down, or maybe to crash land, maybe for some other reason, and then maybe based on, say, whatever they may know about Earth or wherever they are, that maybe this seems like a sparsely populated area, that maybe it might be a good place to set down. But I would almost think that it would need to be a slightly uncontrolled landing for that. And the reason why is, for as sparsely populated as our area is, you can go just a mile or two, east or west away from Flatwoods and be literally in the middle of a forest where there's almost nobody. Whereas Flatwoods, even though it's a small rural town with not a big population, it's certainly more populated than the very middle of the woods. So that would either lead me to think that it wasn't the perfect place to put down, like you said, if these are, if this is an extraterrestrial vehicle. So that would lead me to believe it was almost like a have-to situation more than a get-to, if that makes sense. But again, that's purely speculation.
That makes sense.
So, however, though, oddly enough, whenever the Mays called the emergency number to get the sheriff dispatched to their area, it actually took the sheriff and his deputy some time to get the Flatwoods, because they were out on another call near Gasaway, where there was a report of a plane crashing into a hillside that they never found any evidence of. So that, to me, tells me that whatever aerial phenomenon they saw in Flatwoods, that perhaps they could also witness in Gasaway, or that maybe there was a separate incident that happened in the Gasaway area that brought enough attention to have, folks call and have, instead of, if their first reaction wasn't to run toward it, but to rather call authorities, that makes sense to me that the sheriff was called and was already on scene there looking for something else that they never found. And again, whether that was the same thing, the same aerial phenomenon, or a completely separate event is still unsure and unclear. But that would also lend a little bit of evidence toward the idea that it was a multi-vehicle incident.
Okay, so for 70 years, this plane that crashed into a hillside has never been found. We also have, the Bashful Billy case almost at the same time here in the northern Panhandle. So right there are three crafts, vessels identified or reported just about the same. It's all about the same time.
Yeah. Now I've tried to research the Bashful Billy case, and I've not been able to find too many particulars or too many really good details, other than some sort of general descriptions and reporting.
Right.
But yes, you're right. As far as timeline goes, if I'm not mistaken, it's like within a day or so is when those reports were made, and the description of whatever it was seen being really large also seems to jive with the Flatwoods Monster story.
This is I'm just kind of wondering if with Frank Ficino's research, if there was some kind of flight path that can be charted for these three vessels. It's just very interesting to ponder where the final destination was.
Yeah,
and you get apparently all three are shot down. So that almost sounds like the Battle of L.A. from almost 10 years earlier, and this really isn't being reported on until, or it's just being rediscovered now.
Okay.
But it's a very interesting case.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that. I've heard that mentioned before, but I've not researched it much myself. That was Battle of L.A.
Mhm.
Yeah, I will look into that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Barbara, have you heard that?
No, but it is interesting.
Okay. Well, it just it was it is very interesting. So I just there's three crashes that have been documented just 5 years after Roswell. Okay. So and when we get to the description of the Flatwoods Monster, and we can get into the nickname Braxy in a minute, but it is the spade-like helmet just a singular example, or have there been other documented similar descriptions?
As far as I know, a creature or a figure that's been described with that spade-like head, the only time I've ever had that be specifically attributed to any encounter was the September 12th sighting. Now, there was supposedly another sighting that took place on September 13th in Braxton County. However, really one of the only things that, I shouldn't say one of the only things, but something that does put a little bit of doubt in my mind about the authenticity of the case is that it wasn't reported until 3 years later. But there was a supposed sighting that took place just inside of the Braxton County line, or possibly just inside the Braxton County line. The witness said that the only thing he could recall for sure was that he was between the town of Clay, which is in Clay County, and the town of Gasaway. which is a pretty big stretch on Route 4. It's probably, I don't know, maybe at least 50 miles, if not more than that. But his case, actually, if you'd like, I could actually tell you a little bit about that case, because he has a whole lot of detail in it, and that's another thing that almost gives a little bit of a hesitation for me to take the story at face value, because it's almost like it's so much detail, and it's almost like there's the possibility that somebody read, the Flatwoods account and then maybe punched it up a little and made it a little bit crazier. But nonetheless, it's a very interesting story. And the story goes that George and Edith Snitowski were driving back to their home in New York City from visiting family in Cleveland, Ohio. And, of course, this is pre-interstates, so you'd pretty much be limited to two-lane highways and byways anyway, but that their goal was to drive as many, back roads and see as many small towns as possible on their way back home. So as they're taking this drive and going through Clay County and then up into Braxton County on Route 4, going along the Elk River, they're driving along, and their infant son is in the back, and it's at night, and they experience car trouble, and the car is wanting to sort of stop and sputter. So George pulls the car over to the side of the road, and while he's, once they get pulled over, gets out of the car and lifts up the hood and starts inspecting the car to see if he can tell if anything is wrong. And as far as he can tell while he's looking at it, everything is fine. And so while he's outside, scratching his head trying to figure out, what's wrong, he notices in the woods a bright light. And for some reason, he feels compelled to walk toward it and investigate it. But as he does, he says, the closer he gets to the light, the closer he starts feeling as if he's being poked by like 1,000 small needles, and gets this sensation of, this tingling sensation all over his body that he said grows more intense as he gets closer to the light. So as he gets so close, he begins to get uncomfortable and turn around and walk back. But as he's walking back, his wife lets out a scream, which causes him to try to figure out what she's screaming about. And then eventually he ends up figuring out that whatever's bothering her is behind him. So he turns and looks, and against the silhouette of this bright light, he can see this figure that he described as roughly 8 to 10 feet tall. And what he described is from the waist up, almost appearing, man-like or humanoid, but from the waist down, or what he would call the waist, was this kind of triangular shape, or maybe cone-like, or maybe between like what you would think of as a cone and what you think of as a cylinder on the bottom, and appearing to float. So as he sees this, he's incredibly frightened. Another thing I forgot to mention is he also, one of the things that makes him want to turn around and come back is he also smells, an awful smell that makes him feel nauseated. So another reason why he turned to come back. So as he sees this figure, he's struck with fear as it's coming toward him. So he gets in the car, gets Edith, puts her in the back, and lays her down over their infant son, and he lays down over top of them. And as he cowers there for what, he said could have been minutes, could have been seconds, he's not really sure, but he gets enough bravery to poke his head up that he sees this figure standing in front of the car with his hand touching the car. So he puts his head back down, just waiting for, this whatever this is to open up the door and attack him or something along that nature. And but before too long, he picks his head back up, and there's no figure there. He looks into the woods, and there's no light. So he and his wife get themselves together the best they can and get back in their seats, and he starts the car, and it starts up just fine. He starts driving, and according to his report, he just drives into Sutton, where he finds a diner with an attached hotel, and just stays the night there and has supper, and then leaves the next day. But like I said, his story wasn't reported until 1955. But oddly enough, the story was printed, and I think only printed once, in a now defunct magazine that was called Male Magazine, Male like M-A-L-E, which would be almost like it was described as a men's fitness or men's health magazine, from what I've looked up about it. But as far as I know, he's not given any other interviews, and I know that in Frank Frascino's book, he mentions his story and recounts it and rather detailed, and mentions that he reached out to George and was able to find him, I think, in a phone book of all places, and I think still in New York City, was able to contact him, ask if that was the same George, and he said yes, and he asked if he could interview him, and George said no. He said, whatever, what I said in that article was all that happened, and there's not any more or any less. That's what it is. He said, so you can take that and run with it. And then that's it. As far as I know, I think that's all he spoke to Frank. However, there is one thing that lends some credence to his story, at least I feel like. So this is a bizarre twist in the story, and whether or not it just turns out to be some sort of trick of the mind, there's a possibility of that, but it adds an incredible wrinkle to the story, and that is, it was a couple of years ago or so that a lady that I go to church with came up to me and said, you do stuff with the Flatwoods Monster, right? And I said, yeah. And then she said, my brother saw that. I said, oh, yeah? Who's your brother? So she told me his name, and it was a name I'd never heard of before. So I thought, well, that's odd that there's a witness that I've never heard of. So at some point later, I asked her to clarify, because that was just in passing. So she told me a little bit, and that still didn't make any sense. She was telling me about when they lived in Strange Creek, which is a small community along that route. It's pretty much smack dab in the middle between Ivydale, which is in Clay County, and Gasaway, which is in Braxton. And she said that her brother saw the monster there. And again, this didn't ring any bells. I didn't know what they could be talking about. So I asked her, I said, do you think your brother would be willing to talk to me if I called him on the phone? And she said, oh, yeah, I'm sure. So she gave me his phone number, so then I called him. And he was fine with talking to me, but he didn't have any interest in being recorded or having his name put out there or anything like that. But he said that he would tell me his story. So this is his story. So I think in maybe the year 2000 or so, this gentleman bought Frank's book about the Flatwoods Monster.
Okay.
And was sitting down to read it. And he was more or less, he just bought it because it had to do with where, the area where he was from. So he was just curious, had no other interest in it other than that. So he's reading the book. And when it gets to the area that has to do with George Natowski, well, Frank did his best based off of George Natowski's description of what he saw to draw it, because Frank is an illustrator. So he drew what best he could, do based on the description. He drew what George said he saw and put it in the book. So he's reading and he gets to that picture, and he said immediately he was just struck and was almost like in a panic. And he said he dropped the book, fell on the floor. He didn't know what was happening to him, but he just felt overwhelmed and overcome. So after he sort of got himself together, he picked back up the book and he was just looking at the picture and was trying to figure out what's rattling him so bad. So as he's looking at it, he says, it comes to him rather, I've seen this before. Like this thing that's drawn in this book, I have seen before. So, again, he just keeps thinking and thinking and thinking, and he comes to this notion in this memory that he feels like at some point has been locked away in his brain that he hadn't had access to until he saw this picture. And that he says, this is what I think happened. He said, looking at the timeline, I had been 3 years old. He said, which would blow his mind if he could actually remember that and if he's actually remembering it right. But this is the best as he could describe. So he was little and woke up sometime, in the middle of the night after he should have already been asleep, and it was dark out. And he knew, and all the rest of his family was asleep. So that's the only way timeline-wise he really knows. He doesn't know what time it was. He just knows everybody's asleep, and it's after dark. So I'm thinking any time between maybe 10 or 11 o'clock till as late as 5 or 6 in the morning. So he's woken up out of his bed and gets out of his bed and walks in his bedroom and walks to a window and says that he saw this same thing that was represented in this book walking through their property. And he was immediately scared and was trying to find anybody to tell. He said, but everybody was asleep. All their doors were shut. And he has, I think he told me at the time he would have had 4, sisters, and of course his 2 parents. But everybody was asleep. All their doors are shut. And he knew that if he'd wake anybody up, he'd get in trouble. So he didn't want to do that. So he just went back to bed, calmed himself down. Actually, first, I think checking the window to make sure whatever it was wasn't there anymore, and it wasn't. So he laid back down, got himself calmed down, went to sleep. He said that's all he can really recall after seeing this photo. So, it's kind of got him upset, and he's unsettled for a couple of days. So he decides, well, he's got to call his oldest sister and see, tell somebody, get it off his chest. So he calls her and, basically tells you everything I just told you. And she says, so what do you think? Am I crazy? What's going on? Should I, what do you think? And she said, it's really funny that you mentioned that. She said, I can remember whenever you were really little, like a toddler or a little bit older, you would talk on and on about some monster, and you did it for weeks on end, that you saw some monster, and that it was scary. She said, but at a certain point, you stopped talking about it, and we just all assumed that either you saw something somewhere, like in a book, or you had a bad dream or something, so we just didn't take it seriously. She said, but you would go on and on about seeing some monster, and that's something he had completely, he didn't know or remember. So that just seems incredibly compelling to me, that would give this some credence because it's about the same place where this sighting took place, or if nothing else, maybe it's, related in another way. Maybe there's a third creature, a third landing, who knows? So that's just something that I've always thought was incredibly compelling, or at least interesting, as kind of a footnote to the Flatwoods Monster story.
With the numerous eyewitnesses that you've mentioned, all from around the same time, did any of them have the regression therapy to remember more distinctly?
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't think anybody ever did anything like that. But I think that makes complete sense because, you have a bunch of witnesses who, I would say at the time when it took place, I'd say about half the community believed them, and maybe the other half, didn't. And, the other half that didn't, even if it wasn't all of them, but enough people were vocal and enough people were ostracizing enough that, it wasn't too long before the attention wasn't something that they liked. The attention was mostly negative on their life. So and it was a scary event that happened to them. So I think that they felt like the less they talked about it, the less they thought about it, the better off they were going to be. And then I think, too, that makes perfect sense for them to even keep it up to their whole lives, because we're talking about people that are from, central West Virginia, and from that generation. I can't imagine that their first inclination is going to be to, sort of get in touch with repressed memories or anything like that. The best way to deal with trauma is just to forget about it. So I think there's a lot of that. Or it may have even been something that maybe they didn't know was an option. Maybe they never heard of it. Maybe nobody ever approached them with it. And like I said, really early on, these folks more or less tried to stay out of the limelight, because once the limelight turned sour for them, they really didn't want any more. So that they would seek anything like that out would be unlikely, or that any experts maybe could get a hold of them to do something like that would be unlikely. So, like I said, as far as I know, nothing like that's been done, and I just don't think they would have any interest in it. Like I know, to quote Ed, Ed May, is that, if you talk to him, he wishes the whole thing never would have happened, that he'd never have to talk about it again. He wished it never would have happened. He thinks his life would have been far better off.
Okay, and another unique aspect of this case, which could leave an impact, more of a scar, like you're just saying about Ed, is what almost seems to be like the bioluminescence aspect of the Flatwoods Monster. It's like a lightning bug. It would fall into like that bioluminescent category. It just kind of generates light out of itself, and you get like some of those eels that live in total darkness at the deepest parts of the ocean. But there are some documented cases of like flying humanoids that have that same, have been described as having the same aspect. And I'm sure we we'll probably dovetail into the Mothman in a little bit. There's a little bit of that aspect to it as well. But how's that bioluminescence fit into this case? Maybe it did have some, so freaky that it really did have an impact on Ed May.
Yeah. Well, the only thing that I know of for sure is that, they knew that they could see the color red in the face, but that the rest of the body remained nearly, I believe the quote would be like nearly colorless, like devoid of light. So I'm assuming black or near black, but that the face itself was red, and it would be very dark in the woods when they saw it, so that would contribute to not being able to see color too, but that they could specifically see red. So whether or not that red was glowing or was just bright enough that it was obvious, I don't know. But the part that I know for sure that they mentioned, light, is in what they could only describe as the eyes. He said that the eyes appeared to glow. I know that Fred, when he talks about it now, he describes that the eyes almost being, it's not like that they were necessarily shooting out like light beams, like a flashlight, but that it was almost revealing a light that was within, like inside of these eyes or the sockets or whatever it was. to where it's producing its own light. So whether that's a bioluminescence or whether that was some sort of, technology that whatever they saw was, wrapped itself in, or whether whatever they saw was a piece of technology itself, it's hard to say. But that's, I know, a part of the Flatwoods Monster that's been given the attribute of glowing was the eyes.
Okay, and in the drawings that were done by the eyewitnesses, the poster that people can get with a purchase at the we have to get into doing some plugs here in a second, but in the artists who had some of their paintings at the Mothman Festival. They do depict Braxy as being clothed. You don't have like a whole lot of ET cases with clothing. They're more kind of like naked, and sometimes you get like a little bit of descriptions of some wearing, like the Greys wearing suits, but this seems like it's more of like wearing like almost like a curtain.
Yeah, that was one. I believe that descriptor came from Kathleen. Kathleen described that the bottom of the figure that they saw appeared to show like drape-like folds. Now, whether or not she meant that just whatever she saw kind of took the shape of a drape-like fold, but were maybe actually rigid, or whether it was actually fabric, is not clear. When you look at the drawing that was made based off of her testimony, and the one you're referring to was actually made by a sketch artist in New York City, and the reason why that was done is she was actually attending a television show that was also simulcast as a radio show at the time, and in order to have some kind of imagery to present while she was on the show, they sat her down with a police sketch artist to come up, with the best amalgamation that they could of, from her testimony. So that's what influenced that. And when you look at that drawing, I think you definitely get the impression that it's fabric, but whether or not that's what the artist necessarily, intended, or whether that's what Kathleen May even intended, I'm not sure. Because, something I always try to keep in mind is that, when you're dealing with eyewitnesses, particularly when they aren't artists, they can only give so much. I actually have a background in art, so it kind of makes me a little bit sensitive to this, is that, they can only give sort of what they can give. They can only give what their vocabulary can allow them to give, and their sort of understanding of physical space and physical objects, and then trying to render that in a drawing or a sculpture. That translation is hard, and there's going to be gaps. So that's the thing that I actually often wonder as I look at that drawing. I look at the illustrations done by Ficino based off of eyewitness testimony, and I often am curious, how much of that is actual precise description given by witnesses, and how much of that is having to sort of fill in the blanks or fill in the space between this thing that was specifically described and this thing that was specifically described, and join them. What are you going to join them with? So that's something I often worry about. But yeah, you're right. There does seem to be an element of clothing or armor or something along those lines that's definitely unique, to say the least.
It's like what you said earlier in describing the monster. Was the head shaped like the Ace of Spades, or was that Ace of Spades shape like a collar of this, the clothing, behind his head? We get a few people just kind of having a quick glance.
Yeah.
Your memory isn't perfect, but
right.
But there seems to be something that was seen, not long after when they do the drawings, that there was, everyone saw kind of like the same thing. So I think you're touching on some of the unique aspects of what makes the Flatwoods Monster case so much different than several other ones, kind of like in the same 15-year period between Roswell and just say Kecksburg as another regional example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and shoot, I had a thought, but it went away. Oh, I will tell you the way Freddie remembers it. So this is taking into account Freddie remembering it for 65 plus years, and hoping the best for that to be accurate, and not really having the ability to see if that jives with any other eyewitnesses, because like I said, I've never been able to speak with them, or they've passed away before my interest peaked in it. But the way that he describes that shape is that it's definitely that spade shape, but the way that he recalled it is it's actually a thing that surrounded what he would call the head shape, that it actually surrounded front and back all the way around, and that it seemed to be transparent, but yet not enough so that it's invisible. It's definitely still there. It's definitely some sort of structure, but that he could see through to the head. So for him, and the best as he can describe it, it's not a thing behind, but again, trying to, one, be a witness that relays that to an artist, and then two, be an artist that can actually put that down on paper. There's just so many filters that it has to get through to hope that it's accurate on the other side. But specifically, that's, you mentioned that shape specifically, and that's something that Freddie actually told me really recently. Actually, he said that him talking to me and knowing me has kind of made him thinking about it a little bit more than he had in the past. So, actually, last time he was in the area, he stopped by and talked to me, and we weren't able to talk for very long, unfortunately, because he was actually in the mood to talk about it, and that's not common. But I was actually just about to go out the door with my wife to go do a family get together, so I couldn't talk about him long. But that's one thing he was able to impart to me before I left.
It's you're bringing up a very valid point. It's all part of the mystery that really needs to be developed. So, okay, and we're halfway through. We just did the first hour. Might as well take a second for the listeners, as well as the people tuning in on the archives tomorrow or in the future. What's your website? How they find more videos about the recreations of the Flatwoods Monster. You have some on your website, and how they find out the location of the museum, and just let's take a minute to plug all that.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, a good way to start would just be to visit Braxie.com, and that's BRAXXIE, 2 X's to make it extra spooky and spacey. Or if not that, if that's something that doesn't stick in your brain real well, you could visit flatwoodsmonstermuseum.com. So both of those URLs will get you more or less to the same place on our website. So there, it'll be a jumping off point to, everything that sort of I have or that we have in association with the Flatwoods Monster, as well as links off-site to other places to check out, as well as info on the Monster Museum, which is located in downtown Sutton, just 3 or 4 miles south of Flatwoods, by the way the crow flies, on Main Street at 208 Main Street. And the museum's actually open 7 days a week, weekdays from 9 to 5, and weekends 10 to 4. We do close for some major holidays, but they're like, Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving, New Year's, Easter, and that's actually about it. And then if there's anybody willing to work any of those days, they're more than welcome. So you never know. So, but I do always also recommend that if you want to plan a trip there and you just want to be safe, feel free to call and make sure that we'll be open. That's always fine too. And if you're interested, be sure to like us on Facebook at Flatwoods Monster Museum, or on Twitter. We're not incredibly active there, but we're trying, and that's at Monster Museum. So like us and follow us there. And I will mention too, I'd be remiss if I didn't, the author and paranormal investigator Dave Spinks is actually going to be at our museum on November 23rd, which is a Saturday, from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., and he's going to be set up doing a book signing and selling his books, which include, all things paranormal. He's written books and did investigations that had to do with hauntings, UFOs, Bigfoot, and he actually just wrote a book that was just published called, I believe it's called Real West Virginia UFOs, and we actually just got that in stock, and he's going to have them there to sign. And he's actually nice enough to reach out to me to ask me if I would write a little blurb of my thoughts on the Flatwoods Monster that he included in there. So if you want to come see Dave, and he's been on many TV shows on the History Channel and the Travel Channel, released a lot of stuff himself. He actually live streams a lot of his investigations and things online and on YouTube. So really interesting guy there. I think I about covered anything. If there's anything you want me to add on later or now or whatever, feel free to let me know.
Andrew, you just had Sherry Brake there.
Yeah.
She's one of the leading paranormal authors in West Virginia, and she's doing ghost tours of the Ohio Reformatory and other destinations in like the northeastern Ohio area. What's her website? Hauntedhistory.net, I think. But and she's at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Has a book on it. She's top paranormal investigator too. And so she was just there last weekend. Does she have
this past Saturday?
Does she have an upcoming date for over the winter?
I don't know, but I do know. I think your website that you mentioned of hers is right. If not, I'm sure a Google of Sherry Brake, and I think it's Sherry with an I, and then brake, like the brakes on your car. She does have a website, so I'm sure if you Google it, that'll probably be the first thing that pops up. But yes, she does paranormal and haunting tours. I know all over West Virginia, but also all over the world. I think that she does some in Ireland, and that they, commonly sell out quick. So yeah, she asked me earlier this month if she could stop in, and she was doing travels that were just taking her through the area, so it'd be convenient for her if she could stop and do a book signing there. So we set that up. So we try to do, stuff like that whenever we can, because, it's good for everybody involved. She helps shed light on what we're doing, and, if there's anybody that sort of follows us, we kind of help shed light on her. And so we like to do that anytime we can. So definitely keep a close tabs on us on Facebook for anything like that, because anytime we can put something like that together, we try to. There's another very prolific author in West Virginia named George Dudding, who's written, I know over 50 books on various topics, but he wrote a Flatwoods Monster book that we actually just got in stock. And for the longest time I couldn't figure it out why, but every time I saw him I'd bug him. But anyway, we're talking on having him come do a book signing sometime soon too. I just don't have a date for it yet. So, if you follow us on Facebook, you'll hopefully be seeing something about that within the next couple weeks.
Okay. And you have a lot of T-shirts. Renee just loves her hoodie, and she sleeps in it. And another interesting aspect of like the T-shirts you have there, and some of the like toy displays is the Japanese interest in the Flatwoods Monster.
Yes.
Where does that come from? That was something I wasn't expecting. It's like cool.
Yes.
What's the scoop on that?
Yeah, that was a surprise to me too, and it's actually I'm learning more and more about that every day, because it's still somewhat of a mystery. I actually had a visitor come visit us not this past September, but September of 2018, and her name was first name was Ray, I think, or Ree, and I can't pronounce her last name, and I don't know that she would want me to say it anyway, but she visited us last year. She originally from Japan, but had lived in the U.S. for the last 15 years, but now lives in California. But she visited us because she was familiar from a really early age of that drawing of the Flatwoods Monster, the famous one that you talked about earlier. That's that poster that we have at our museum, and but she didn't really know the story, and she happened to see something written in Japanese, of all things, online that actually referenced the story and referenced the museum and that sort of thing. So she looked into it, and she planned a trip and flew out from California and stayed with us for a few days. So while she was there, anytime she came in, we had tremendous and long conversations. And at the time, she wasn't really sure how the Flatwoods Monster came to be so well known in Japan, or at least the image of the Flatwoods Monster. She said the story of the Flatwoods Monster was far less familiar than the image itself. So she's actually been doing research, and she and I have become a little bit of pen pals. So I actually just got an email from her 2 days ago where she's been doing research, and so she's been, telling me more and more about it, and I'm actually going to sift through an email right now to see what she told me. So she said right now she's currently investigating who introduced the monster as, and she quotes, quote unquote, 3-meter alien in Japan. So in Japan, they know our monster as 3-meter alien or 3-meter tall alien. It depends. I don't know exactly how it translates, but they associate it with that picture. And she said that picture traumatized many Japanese children in the 1970s. But she said that it was in a book that was written in books. Books. The monster was written about by an author named Hiroshi Minamiya. I can't say it, so I'm not going to even try. But the first name Hiroshi. He wrote a lot of UFO books and articles for children of the time. And it said that in his first book, oh golly, I'm not going to be able to say this. Anyway, in his first book written in 1968, it introduced this story to Japanese children, and she thinks that this is one of the first times, if not the first times, that the Japanese public at large ever was introduced to the Flatwoods Monster. But then she went on to read that a UFO researcher who lives in Japan wrote a book, I think called The Humanoids. The book was Flying Saucer Reviews, The Humanoids. This is 1966. So it appears that, because there's a big, I don't know if it's an underculture or if it's part of the mainline culture of Japan that's really into these, myths, monsters, ghosts, folklore, that sort of thing. So they keyed really hard into this. I don't know if it's just the story or the imagery really early on in the 60s. And it just became this kind of presence in that subculture where the monster's likeness, so not necessarily its character or the story, but the likeness was used in many like animated TV shows, in various video games. Like off the top of my head, 2 I know of that were produced in Japan, one for Nintendo NES and one for Sega Genesis. So it's just been like this thing that they could easily plug in if they need a monster or a creature. They just basically use the form that's in this poster, but not necessarily the story. So I think the story is playing catch up to the image in Japan. But there's toys, that's another thing you mentioned. In our museum, we have like at least 4 or 5 different iterations of the Flatwoods Monster made by, completely different production companies and artists. So it's not like it's one person that got real into it and made, 4 or 5 different iterations. It's one company making their own iteration and another one making their other one. And I'm sure anybody that's real familiar with toys would know the company Bandai, which is a very famous Japanese toy company. And we have figures of the Flatwoods Monster made by Bandai and on display at our museum. So it's just incredible.
It was just in a small rural town, you just don't expect to see, walk into a museum and it's kind of see all this Japanese writing. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just you just don't expect to see that. And it's like where, but there's obvious trans-Pacific connection there that it's a reciprocal admiration for this event. And you also have on display a part of the tree from which Braxy emerged and revealed himself to the May family and Gene, who all came up to
Gene Lemon.
So it has that piece of wood been tested for outer space contaminants or radiation, something like that?
No, not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge has that ever been tested. Now, I will say I couldn't tell you exact dates or who did it, but I have been told that the actual crash landing site, that soil samples were taken and that radiological tests were done at the time. However, those were all done, as far as I know, by people there on assignment from the government. So, of course, they're not going to give anybody local, test results. It's going to be all internal.
That just got you an NSA file for saying that.
Well, that's very much public knowledge. But and whether that means that they did the research and the testing and they found nothing, or whether they found something, in either case, they're not going to have any need or want to report back to, a bunch of, West Virginia residents that, don't hold any other importance, to at least to the government or to anybody in Washington, D.C. So like I said, that's another thing that I point at, to where, they could have found everything on that crash site, or they could have found absolutely nothing. And I think the response that we would hear would be exactly the same, and that's nothing. So that's really not anything you could point at and get much from. But there may have been some other tests done later on in the future, or later on, coming forward into the future at the crash site. But if there are, I've never seen any findings from those or reportings of those, or anybody, those have never came up to me. And the property is and always has been private property. I think there may have been a time under a particular ownership that maybe access to the land may have been a little bit easier than it is now. But like I said, it still would have been very much private, and you'd have to get permission. But as far as I know now, I don't know of anybody that's successfully gotten permission to be on the property, within the last 20 years.
Okay. Well, so we know about where the incident happened. It's just private property. I just want to stress that. You just can't go out. Hopping fences and trying to get
right.
To be, because you do have maps at the museum of where the crash or the incident happened. You also have all the chairs. Locations around town. So there are maps that people can follow to relive this experience. Can you tell us a little bit about the chair map and the chairs and coming back to the museum after the visit?
Okay. Well, actually, my board of directors, they actually had this plan going back well before I even joined the organization in 2013, of this idea to, at some point, it came into their, focus that large, oversized novelty chairs were a thing that people, enjoyed. So they had this idea that had sat on the back burner for years of making like a large, oversized novelty chair in the shape and color scheme of the Flatwoods Monster. Although that's as far as it ever got, as far as I know. And another idea that had sat on the back burner was having some sort of sculpture somewhere that showed the Flatwoods Monster. Well, not too long after I came on board, I kind of tried to look at. I started with the sculpture because I wanted to kind of see about the feasibility of having a sculpture made. And sculptures made out of metal or any sort of traditional things that you make large outside sculptures out of are incredibly expensive. to the point where even trying to come close to it would be at least a year's budget, completely the year's budget, which means, there's no employees, there's no building, there's no nothing, there's no activity. It's just doing that. So it was not feasible at all. So we kind of left that. Well, at some point I came up with this idea of kind of combining those two ideas, and by doing like a large oversized novelty chair, but really be doing large. So I came up with this proposal to do these 10-foot tall chairs, 10 foot tall and 4 feet wide, and to not just do one, but to do many, and which ended up turning into 5, and place them all over the county. So that way it becomes this thing that's a little bit bigger than just like one novelty chair sitting somewhere that's maybe not tremendously big. So then it kind of folds them into one. And making a chair out of wood it's expensive, but it's far more cost effective than trying to make a sculpture. So getting into 2015 is when we started really, trying to find places to put these, and finding a finding a builder that could build them for us, and then start placing them. So slowly over the next 2 years, we ended up building, placing, and painting 5 monster chairs all over Braxton County. And on our website, if you visit, like I said, braxy.com or flatwoodsmonstermuseum.com, you'll be able to find, maps for the monster chairs. And we do have a printed map in our museum that shows them, so that way people come to the area that either don't want to look at their phone or maybe don't have good cell signal everywhere, can just take it and run with it. But we do have, in a very vague placement, where the monster sighting took place, but we don't have the address or even the road. We try to keep that as vague as possible, just so that we don't appear to be encouraging anybody to trespass. That doesn't keep people from trying, because unfortunately this info is, all over the internet, not just on our website, that's for sure. But yeah, so we try to give kind of a vague idea. That way, if they're in the town of Flatwoods, at least they know, oh, well, I'm pretty close. Because Flatwoods isn't very big, not by any stretch. So if you're in Flatwoods, you're pretty close. But yeah, so we have them strewn all about. There's one in downtown Flatwoods. There's one in between Sutton and Flatwoods on your way to the Sutton Lake. There's one at Holly Gray Park, which is on Airport Road. There's one located at the Great Bed and Breakfast and Restaurant Cafe Semino in Sutton. And there's one more. Oh, there's one more at the Elk River Camp and RV, which is located along the Elk River going toward Gasaway, which is it's a campground and an RV park. So not only are, just if you just want to visit 5 monster chairs and have a good photo op, there's that, but there's also kind of a side plot that you can run with these chairs, and that is if you visit them all and take a picture at each one of them and then come back to the museum and sort of flip through your pictures and show them to us, we'll give you your free Braxy sticker, which is the only way you can get one. So if you like our free Braxy sticker that's on the door of our museum and you want it, that's the way you can get it. You can try to bribe whoever's working, but they've been given explicit instructions not to sell them. They're only to earn. So if you want to take the free Braxy challenge, which is taking your picture at each Flatwoods Monster chair and helping keep the memory of the Flatwoods Monster alive, you'll earn your free Braxy sticker for you and everybody in your party.
Cool. Okay, and you just mentioned the Elk River.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that runs right behind the museum.
Yeah.
And if I know it's mentioned in as the location. I think it's where Buffalo Bill first or it was his first victim that he weighted down, but she became
in the Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, in the Silence of the Lambs. Okay, so what's we have Braxy showing up in 1952 near to the Elk River and showing up in Thomas Harris's Silence of the Lambs. 35 or so years later. What's in the water there?
As far as I know, mostly trout and muskie, but and maybe some bass. But I don't know. Yeah, I know that as far as I know, the Silence of the Lambs story, and Buffalo Bill in particular, and his story was based around the real life murderer Ed Gein, who was from Texas. So I don't know, if you're trying to pull some things from real life but then fictionalize it. I don't know if just West Virginia seemed interesting to him or appealing. But as far as I know, nothing associated with murders or, anything like that involving the Elk River have any bearing on reality, but rather, the fiction of the book. But, yeah, I've always been intrigued by that, and I really wish in the book they were more clear on a specific location, because whether or not it's fiction or not, I'm sure that the county of Clay would love a place to put up a sign, for fans of the books to come visit. But yeah, I think it's only ever vaguely mentioned as the Elk River in, I think, Clay County, that's a little bit more southern to us. The Elk runs through, starting in Webster County, going through Braxton after the Sutton Dam, and then into Clay, and then finally Kanawha County, where it meets the Kanawha River in the West Virginia's capital, Charleston. But yeah, as far as I know, there's nothing associated there. However, we do have some. I think they're called blue crane. We have some crane along the Elk River that are quite. There's something to see in person. If you're looking at a picture, it might not be very impressive, but in person, they're very impressive. I've seen them a lot kayaking the Elk River, and I think that also occasionally bald eagles are seen on the Elk River, but hopefully not too many, cut up and taxidermied bodies from, semi-cannibals. Hopefully we'll keep those to a minimum.
Okay. Quantico is in the D.C. area. The movie, The Mothman Prophecies, starts in D.C. And Richard Gere ends up in Point Pleasant. That's the movie version. It's not. More of the John Keel semi-autobiography or biographical book, but we got together again at the Mothman festival last month. Okay, we have these two West Virginia monster cryptid mystery. I don't know what I don't know, UFO cryptid. I don't know if there's really a comparison between the two, other than just saying monster. They're appearing 14, 15 years apart, so somewhere in that time period.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Is there any kind of connection, something in, like one of Keel's theories about, all this stuff is connected, but, we don't really understand it, and interdimensional travel. Do you have a theory on anything like that based on, you're talking to Steve Ward and Bill or Brent Raines too, and all the other speakers.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I don't really know. Like whenever I think about the, I would say if there's a connection, there's not an obvious one. Like you said, the time span between is different, and as far as I could tell, the Flatwoods Monster incident was an isolated incident, even if it took place over slightly different places in geography and slightly different places in time. It's still, you're looking at no bigger diameter and size of maybe 20 miles, like its circumference and size, as far as I know of, with the possible exception of Bashful Billy, which of course is bigger, which is in Wheeling, but still in the same state. And by the way, the crow flies, not too terribly far away, but time-wise, everything is within days. And then as far as similar-sided creatures, it really doesn't extend out from that, whereas Mothman, once he was seen, he didn't stop being seen, or at least it seemed that way. I mean, many, many, many reports, especially a rash around the time and around that location, whether it's Point Pleasant in West Virginia or nearby Gallipolis in Ohio. And then, of course, there's been some, I know more in supposed, Mothman-type sightings in in the United States, and then some abroad. So it just seems to be this thing with Mothman that it's almost maybe ongoing, or it's a phenomenon that's ongoing. So there's a little bit of that kind of makes it seem dissimilar. But then also, but there seems to be a maybe a more ethereal nature to Mothman that really has ever been reported with the Flatwoods Monster. So. But yeah, I suppose there could be a connection if there is sort of an interdimensionality aspect to either of them. The only other things that come to mind as far as a sort of a real true to life connection that you can really put your finger on is the professional skeptic Joe Nickel. He hypothesizes that actually both the Flatwoods Monster and the Mothman are the same thing, and that is a misidentified barn owl. So that's one connection that I know exists, whether anybody likes it or not, or whether anybody thinks he's correct or not, which you could totally debate. I mean, you really can't. There is no proving either or at this point. But I know that is his hypothesis for both. That both the Mothman and Flatwoods Monster were both misidentified barn owl.
Okay, it's kind of like the sandhill crane that it seems a bit of a stretch as an explanation for Mothman.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really believe that one.
Well, especially, one of my favorite instances of the one of my favorite retellings of the Mothman or experiences at the Mothman. I can't remember the man's name or exactly when it happened, but the witness that claimed to see the Mothman standing beside his bed in the middle of the night and appearing as, or at least to him, being a demonic presence, that sort of thing. That would come. That's obviously not a barn owl. But at that point, you'd have to make another skeptical conclusion, which you could, I'm sure. But that would definitely be a case of not a barn owl.
Yeah, that's. I think there's a little bit more going on than the regular fauna in the area, but we'll save that for later.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to pick up on subject that's more contemporary with Mothman, but it is more of a regional case with the Flatwoods Monster incident. There's the Kecksburg incident that was, Giorgio Tsoukalos came out like southeast of Pittsburgh to investigate this with I think Stan Gordon.
Stan Gordon has done a lot of investigation there.
Yeah, and it's probably would be considered a regional UFO case. Yeah, it's about 13 years after the Flatwoods Monster incident, but it's only a year or so prior to the Mothman. So we actually have those three better known incidents, regional incidents, not all that far apart. It is. There's the Kecksburg craft was more of like a bell-shaped. That's different than what is kind of the general impression of the Flatwoods craft, if that's really what was seen. So, do you have any kind of view on commonalities there? Is it more differences?
I think other than, I spoke earlier about how the only, descriptors I've ever heard concerning any sort of craft possibly seen at the landing site at, Flatwoods Monster was this sort of round, almost, organic, smooth shape. The Kecksburg vessel also seemed rather organic and smooth in nature. I believe it's also kind of been described as almost like an acorn. So definitely not, perfectly round by any stretch, but still round-ish. But yes, having some sort of writing or hieroglyph type figures around the outside of it. But, a thing that I often think about when concerning sort of different types of these vessels, a person that actually you would think he would have came to my attention long ago, but just within the last year or so, that's came to my attention that I've been looking into a lot was Bob Lazar, with his story of supposedly that he was a worker at Area 51, and if you buy that, his accounts, he refers to seeing 8 different styled crafts in 8 different hangars at Area 51, and all of them looking different, and that he really only got to have any sort of intimate knowledge with one, but none of the others. I believe he mentions in his interviews that he only got a glimpse of all of them all at once because all the doors between each hangar happened to be open, and you could see through and see them all. So, like I said, if you can take him at his word, it would tend to suggest that the make, almost like the make and model of these crafts vary greatly, maybe almost to the point of how our vehicles, vary greatly. A UPS truck and a motorcycle are very different, but they'll both get you down the road. So, I don't know if that's the sort of thing that we're looking at. I mean, it would stand to reason, I think, that the variety would be just as vast as anything that we can do. So, I don't know if there's anything like that. And then, like you talked about earlier, the Arizona lights, to where and other light formations like that, where they, theorize that these are like maybe triangular vessels. So, there's the cigar, there's the teardrop, all these different sort of formations that people see. So I don't know. I just think maybe the Kecksburg crash, maybe he was flying a Toyota, and the Flatwoods Monster was flying a Ford, and they just don't look the same. Yeah, I don't know.
It's just some interesting things to ponder from areas that had something very unusual, but they aren't all that far apart. So
no, they are not.
And as I was preparing for the show, I was looking for some patterns from last night's really interesting interview. I don't know how many there are from England and Flatwoods. There's doesn't seem like there's really a time pattern other than there's a clump of sightings, within the like a same 24-hour period, but Roswell's 5 years earlier, and Kecksburg's 13, 14. Rendlesham is in 1980. There's not really a time pattern, but there's something about the area that is drawing anomalous events, and you do have Rosemary Ellen Guiley's book on UFO cryptids on say what the museum. I haven't had a chance to read that, but I'm sure she thoroughly investigated a number of these anomalies within the state. Do you have much to say about that? Have you read the book?
No, I actually haven't had a chance to read it, other than, I shouldn't say not read it, but not really in depth. I've thumbed through it a time or two, but not to great detail. But yeah, there is an odd. It's possible that maybe I just feel this way because I live in West Virginia, so my exposure level would be far higher. But it feels like West Virginia, has a disproportionate amount of paranormal / just strange things, strange creatures, strange phenomena, activity that really it seems like too high in a lot of ways. Like, we've talked about the Flatwoods Monster and the Mothman having two very prominent, I guess that's a relative term, but, prominent, stories that took place in West Virginia, where, there's probably some states that don't have anything like that. And then, of course, the lesser-known story of the Grafton Monster that also was seen in Grafton, I believe, in, I want to say, 1964. The 7-foot-tall white thing with broad shoulders that didn't seem to have a head. I mean, that's crazy. And that stirred up a town for weeks, that involved, posses with pitchforks and guns and, torches and the like. So it's just an odd thing that West Virginia seems to be so inundated with the bizarre and the creepy and the, So I don't know. I don't know what to account for that.
Okay. Must be in the water.
Perhaps.
And and Barbara, when we've had Jason Jarrell as a guest, we've covered the unusual number of giants found just in this small area of the Kanawha River Valley in the South Charleston area, and 3 were found just in one mound alone. That was all documented in the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology publication number 12. So that's just something we're gonna have to do. We have like, I don't know, five minutes or so left, but that might have to be another show. Is why is what's now the state of West Virginia having an unusual number of strange cases? Is it the water?
I don't know. I've been sitting here the whole time sipping some, so I hope not. But I don't know. It's very bizarre. Yeah, and there's mounds. So not even just the giants thing is odd too, but then our inordinate amount of burial mounds also seems kind of high too. Of course, you have Moundsville, named after the fact that there's a mound right beside the West Virginia Penitentiary, and the several mounds in the Kanawha Valley area, like you mentioned, and I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but I know that there's more peppered around the state. So that just, I just don't know what it is. It's odd. I don't know if it has to do with, geology, or if it has to do with remoteness, or what, what it is. But it's hard to say.
Okay, and let's see. We're kind of winding down the show. Do you want to give the Flatwoods Monster Museum website out again, and anything else you want to plug?
Sure. If you want to find out more information about the museum or about the Flatwoods Monster as a whole, visit flatwoodsmonstermuseum.com. That's our website. If you forget all of this stuff, or the handles on YouTube or YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, just Google search Flatwoods Monster, and I'm sure we'll be the first, in the first couple of results there. So you can always trust, use trusty old Google. But for sure, follow us on Facebook at Flatwoods Museum. If you just go up to the search bar and just search at Flatwoods Monster Museum, all one word, it'll pop up. That'll be should be the one and only result. And do check us out online at flatwoodsmonstermuseum.com. And in that website too, you can also find out more info about other area attractions, or accommodations if you want to come visit, that sort of thing. You can find that there, as well as some. Speaking of other attractions, if your listeners are into the weird and the unexplained, definitely look into the Heyman House, which is a supposedly haunted house in Sutton, actually just about 2 blocks away from the Monster Museum, and they actually do tours quite often, so that might be something to look into, the Heyman House. And there have been, I want to say, at least 3 different reports of Bigfoot sightings around and near the Sutton Lake area, going back into the 80s. They've just recently surfaced, as far as I know, and as far as when I've been paying attention. But they're old accounts. And I think some new ones too. So checking out the Sutton Lake for possible Bigfoot activity might be something else you may be interested in as well. And you should be able to find info on all those things on our website, braxy.com or flatwoodsmonstermuseum.com.
Okay, and you can see dramatic recreations on the Project Blue Book TV series, and you might be able to see more about Braxton and the Mothman on the what was it, the Fallout 76 video game? Is that the right one?
Fallout 76, a video game that was released last November. It takes place all in the state of West Virginia. I believe it's like the fourth Fallout game. But the Flatwoods Monster is a creature that you can fight and kill in Fallout 76, as well as Mothman. And then not to mention, Grafton Monster, the Giant Sloth, other things that call that call West Virginia home. So if you're into that sort of thing, check it out. Okay, and if you want to stop in and pick up their own the ceramic candle. What do you call it? The lanterns.
The that's what I was looking for. Thank you. We have ours proudly displayed next to the TV. So,
cool.
Yeah.
We have
really
those, and there's a real interesting story about that. I'm sure we don't have enough time to get into it, but if you're interested in the story of the Flatwoods Monster Lanterns, we actually have a page dedicated to that on our website, and I'm actually working on a short documentary about the history and the production of those, because it's rather interesting. They actually go back into the late 60s, which for a novelty item that has to do with the strange and the paranormal coming out of Central West Virginia, that's kind of odd and a story all in itself. So I hope to have that finished before the end of the year and released. It'll just be released on YouTube and through our website and Facebook and stuff. So it'll be free to watch and that sort of thing. So that's something else to look forward to.
All right, cool stuff. Barbara, do you want to come in and step in and wrap up the show for us? I think we're actually finishing maybe like a minute or two ahead of time, so I'm not going to get in trouble with the Blog Talks English Robo Babe. So,
Yep, you're absolutely right, and I do thank both you and your wonderful guests for all of the information. We certainly are going to be looking forward to checking out monsters all over the place here. But it's fascinating, and it's really quite amazing at how these kind of legends start and are carried out and in many ways become a part of our history, which is rather fascinating. So thank you, everyone, for listening. We really appreciate your being with us tonight. This will be up on YouTube, and if you re-listen to it, please subscribe so that we can let you know when other fascinating shows like this one are going to be on. So for now, good night, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate your listening.